Welcome to Inside Brussels. This is the very first episode of the European Conservatives news show, where we talk to decision makers and experts looking at what kind of impact EU policies and legislation will have on your everyday lives as Europeans. Today's topic is the war the EU declared on fossil fuels and petrol-driven cars. We're going to take a deep dive into two legislation, the Euro 7 emission standards and the ban on new fossil-fueled vehicles starting in 2035. Europe is spending billions to reduce mere fractions of its already low carbon emissions, only to put enormous strains on both the industry and the consumers. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is increasing its fossil fuel consumption, making our efforts effectively worthless. It seems that Euro 7 and the ban coming in 2035 are part of the EU's wider push for top-down green energy transformation. Is this push based on scientific facts, or is it more ideology-driven? For all it's worth, the European Union appears to be willingly sacrifice the economic well-being and prosperity of its people on the altar of the virtue-signaling green agenda. Today's young generation is going to be the first ones with decreasing living standards in hundreds of years. Now, everybody's asking the same questions we brought to the table today. With EU declaring war on combustion engines, what will the future of European transportation look like? Will Europeans be able to afford the switch to electric cars? How long will old cars be allowed as more and more cities are implementing stricter low-emission zones? Can our industry undergo this transformation while also preserving its competitiveness? These are the questions we're going to answer today to find out how the decisions made by EU institutions will impact your lives and how you can prepare for their consequences. 2035 may seem distant, but it's only 11 years from now until the full ban of fossil fuel vehicles, and it seems naive to think that second-hand cars will always remain an option for those who can't afford to go electric, especially in large cities where we live, work, and take our children to school. If we stay on this track, we might wake up one day to the fact that our old family vehicles will have been banned in the ever-growing low-emission zone, while the affordable electric ones are still just a distant dream, a privilege of the elite. Is this really what we want Europe's future to look like? But let's not jump so far ahead in time, as Euro 7 is expected to enter into force in 2025. The Commission's original plan, which we will be discussing in more detail later on, included measures that could have had catastrophic consequences on both consumers and the automotive industry. Fortunately, the European Conservative parties intervened. The Euro 7 standards were approved on committee level past month, and the plenary vote will be later this month. So let us first watch our reporter, Tamás Orbán, summarizing the most important aspects of Euro 7 following its adoption in the Parliament before we turn to our first guest in the studio, Mr. Samuel Furfari, who spent his entire professional career as a civil servant at the European Commission and is the former president of the European Society of Engineers and Industrialists, to look at the wider geopolitical aspects of the issue.
The European Parliament's Environmental Committee adopted the new Euro 7 car emission standards for new vehicles sold in the Union, with 52 votes in favor and 32 votes against. By 2035, the new rules are expected to lower nitrogen emissions by 35% compared to Euro 6 in the case of cars and vans, and by 56% in the case of trucks and buses. For the first time ever, Euro 7 also includes non-exhaust emissions like microplastics from tires and brake particles. According to the Vice Rapporteur Alexandr Vondra from the ECR, the compromise represents the right balance between environmental goals and the vital interests of the European car industry and the European citizens. The Euro 7 is expected to be the last standard to be introduced before the European Union bans the sale of all new fossil fuel cars in 2035. For this and more, I'm Tomáš Orbán for the European Conservatives.
We'll turn to Euro 7 in a few minutes, but before we dive into the specifics of EU policymaking, let us take a wider approach with Mr. Furfari, who's also a professor of energy geopolitics and author of several books in the field. Thank you so much, Mr. Furfari, for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Professor, as you mentioned in several of your books, you described how Western societies lived in constant fear of fossil fuel shortage, only to enter the era of fossil fuel abundance recently. From a geopolitical perspective, what do you think of the EU's fossil fuel abundance at a time when both supply and demand are increasing globally?
It is very strange that we believe in Europe that there is a shortage of fossil fuel and that we should abandon totally fossil fuel, when in the rest of the world is totally different. Even in USA, we ban the shale gas in Europe completely, even to try to understand if we have shale gas. But we buy shale gas in America, and we are the main client of America. What is really impressive is that the massive investment that there is across the world on fossil fuel, on coal, on oil and gas. Even the Arabs are investing in Israel to produce more gas. And here we say that it's dépassé. So it's quite surprising.
Talking about the automobile industry, the issue of competitiveness and dependence, especially concerning the Chinese electric vehicle production, are usually brought up in these discussions. How do you see the future of Europe's industry on the global EV markets amid this rapid change ahead of us?
We can't do anything, but absolutely anything, without energy, even for eating. And therefore, there is an impact of the cost of energy on all economy worldwide. And because we have a price of energy which is tremendous, very expensive, and not because of the war in Ukraine, it was just before, we are losing competitiveness. And the rest of the world is going to cheap energy, abundant energy, including coal for electricity generation, and therefore we are losing our competitiveness. Last week in the Financial Times, Mario Draghi, which is somebody which can really trust for economy, say that we cannot continue with this price of energy in Europe. We need to change that immediately. That's a real issue.
Naturally, EV and green energy resources production is going to increase competition for resources. Now, the EU is pushing for more and more raw material to be extracted locally, but we are still going to be dependent on lithium and other natural resources that are extracted elsewhere, especially in Africa, which is gradually becoming the economic backyard of China. Is there a concern that China and other countries may take advantage of Europe's green transition in this way?
50 years ago, we had a crisis of oil supply, a massive crisis, because we were relying too much on an area of the world, the OPEC countries. But then we reacted, including the EU reacted strongly, and now we can find oil everywhere in the world. We are falling exactly in the same pit, focusing on a few countries, like we were 50 years ago with oil, and we are too dependent of China for raw material, which we claim that it's essential for the energy transition. But it's worse than the past, because in the past we have been able to find other solutions also by energy saving. Here we say the reverse. We want more electrical vehicles, so that means more dependence on China. It's a nightmare is coming.
Thank you so much, Mr. Furfari, for joining us today and taking the time to participate in our news show.
Thank you.
We'll soon be back with MEP Rob Roos, the Vice Chair of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group. But first, let us watch MEP Alexandr Vondra, the rapporteur of the Euro 7 file, telling us how Euro 7 became one of the rare conservative victories in the European Parliament.
Mr. Vondra, you described the Parliament's position on your file as a balance between environmental goals and the vital interests of manufacturers. Can you tell us a bit about what's being proposed and how to understand this compromise?
I would even add not just the manufacturers, but also the customers, because we are producing the goods that the customers are seeking to purchase, to buy. And yes, there is some golden rule of the sustainable development, so environmental concerns on one hand, economic possibilities on the other hand, and the social affordability on the third end. And here the Commission proposal was really bad. It was classic Franz Timmermans, very radical green proposal. So I'm very glad that after some times we succeeded here to reach the position and approve this in our committee, and it's going to be voted in the plenary soon, that is bypassing the socialists and the Greens and brought much more realism into the game.
The European Council's position is somewhat different. After many countries criticized the Commission's proposal for putting an unnecessary burden on automakers and jeopardizing European jobs, the Commission agreed on a significantly watered-down version. How do you see the Council's and the Parliament's positions reconciled, and what results do you expect in the trilogue negotiations?
I am basically very happy with the Council's position because it also assumes the same concerns as I do. And of course, the final shape of the legislation will be done in a trialogue between the Council, the Parliament and the Commission. And I guess that we would be able to reach the conclusion which would make the cars available.
Reaching a bit further in time, the EU is going to ban the sale of all new fossil fuel cars from 2035. Coming from the Czech Republic, a country with a powerful car industry, how do you see the impact of that shift to electric vehicles in Europe?
I think, look, electric vehicles are very expensive. And, for example, the Czech budget is not in a shape to subsidize the individual purchase of those cars. So I think it would take much time, when the low-income or medium-income people would be able to purchase the electromobiles. And that's exactly the reason why we were fighting for Euro 7 to be more realistic, because there was a real danger that if the Commission proposal would be approved, the automotive industry would stop to produce the smaller combustion cars, not in 2030 something, but immediately. And thus, the lower income customers would have just only two chances, either to drive the bicycle, and maybe in Netherlands it's fine, because it's a flat country, but in a hilly Czech Republic it would be much, much more difficult, or to purchase the old car, deeply under the norm of Euro 6, and thus, the impact on the environment would be totally devastating. So this is on the short term, to keep the production alive. And then in the medium and longer term, there should be some review. And that's a promise. And if there is a progress with the e-fuels, then maybe it can take some new life to the combustion engines, because e-fuels, it means the solution without the carbon emission. But, this is not up to me to decide. I think the business has to decide, economy has to decide, and innovation has to decide. So we'll see how the future will be done. Maybe just the electromobility, but then I'm afraid that Chinese are the victors, because their cars are not just cheaper, but even better. Or we will have more options on the table, but all decarbonized. But the freedom of choice is a way how to how to initiate the innovation and how to bring the price down.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roos, for joining us today. It is not every day that conservative parties can find a common ground with the center-right against the socialists and Greens. As a substitute member of the ENVI committee, can you tell us a bit how bad the Commission's original proposal was?
Well,
about the Euro 7 emission standards?
Yes. I hope this is a harbinger for the next mandate from 2024, because in my opinion, this is the way it should be. The Christian Democrats are much ideologically much closer to us than they are to the Greens and to the socialists. So what we have seen the last 4 years is that they give everything away, and that's why we end up with a terrible situation about our energy policy and energy insecurity, etc. So I hope they will come to us next mandate, and this is a good start. To come back to the Euro 7, the proposal of the Commission, it was not good. So it was not good for the people, and it was also not good for the environment. Start with the people. I give you an example. We have Euro 1 till Euro 6, and that decreased the emissions by 90%. 90%. It was huge. But from Euro 6 to Euro 7, it will only reduce the NOx emissions with only 4% for cars and vans, and it will reduce the emissions for big trucks with only 2%. But the financial costs are tremendous. So there is only a little advantage in environment, but the costs are very high. And this is not good for consumers and companies, because when a small car, all the cars will be 2,000 euro more expensive than they are now. That means small cars cannot be produced anymore. The margins are too small. And small cars are better for the environment than big cars, but they will disappear. But also, people will keep on driving in their old cars because the investment for a new car is too expensive, and also for the companies. And what we see now is that 8 years ago we introduced Euro 4. And since then, still 3/4 of the big trucks are still from Euro 4, and they have an emission of 92% of NOx. So, if we want to improve the environment, we have to stimulate that people buying the new cars, and that is not working when we make it more expensive.
The discussion about electric vehicles always tries to portray them as magically bringing all pollution down to zero.
Yes.
But as you mentioned, apart from social and economic costs, these top-down green policies always have their hidden environmental costs as well. So yes. How green is EV industry actually?
What the most people do not know is that electric cars also have a lot of air pollution. Because of the batteries, they are 40%. They have 40% more weight than traditional combustion engine cars, and that means they pollute more little particles because of the tires and the brakes, and that is what the most people do not know. And also, if you want to have an honest judgment about the electric vehicles, about sustainability, you have to look from the whole life cycle. So from mining all the raw materials till the recycling the waste. And if you look at that process, if you have seen the lithium mines with all these little children up until their knees in the mud and without any protection, that is not very sustainable. But also, if we want to get rid of all these batteries, they are very toxic and polluting. it's very difficult to recycle them. And we have to take that into account also. And that is often not the case. And also, another thing is that if you have electric vehicles, you have to charge them in a proper way. If you have nuclear power, the air is clean and the energy is very clean. But nowadays we have renewables, and 60% of the renewables is biomass. And when we are burning complete forests to charge your electric vehicle, it's also not very sustainable. And that is what people often do not know.
Speaking of social and economic impact, how do you see the fossil fuel ban from 2035? It seems to be a distant future, but it's only 11 years from now. And I wonder whether Europeans are actually aware what it will mean.
Yes, I see a couple of problems. First of all, it's coming very fast, of course. But for the economy, it's terrible. The problem with the European Union is that they always start doing something. And then when the problems come up, they start thinking, and it should be the other way around. It will cost 600,000 jobs. And this message came after the legislation was approved here in the parliament, by the council, in the trilogue, and then certain member states start worrying about the economy. We should do that in front. If we have some new measures, we should look at what is the impact of this, and then start.
Sure.
Let's say make a decision: will we do it or will we don't do it? But they do it always the other way around. So that is one problem. The other problem is that we depend on China for a lot of this rare earth materials, because we need so much lithium, cobalt, all these rare earth materials. And if we want to replace all the cars we have, we need 866 years of mining for cobalt and 536 years for lithium. So it's just not doable to replace all the cars. It will be very expensive. A lot of people cannot afford to buy an electric car, so they will be losing this freedom, because if you now, most households have one car at least, and they can go wherever they want, whenever they want. And if you lose your car, you lose a big part of your freedom. So this has a social impact. But also if we want to change that, I think because of all this raw material that we need, it's just not possible to make this transition so fast. And the only way to do it is to have hybrid models. You can use the electric part when you're driving into the city, but you have your combustion engine when you do the long ways. And this makes it much easier, because then we don't need this much materials, and also it makes the car much cheaper. And that makes it possible for people to have their freedom back.
I do hope that by the time we reach 2035, the European Parliament indeed will have such great solutions, and the one you just proposed. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and stay tuned, because we'll be back soon with more episodes discussing topics that are of vital interest to European citizens.